Hey guys, tonight we start our journey in the enchanting, snug, and utterly heartwarming universe of Victorian factory employment. This was that truly magical epoch where a child's workday spanned a standard 12 hours, and the very air quality carried the legitimate classification of a lethal weapon. So, before you get too settled, please perform your civic duty. Take a moment, gently tap the like button, and subscribe to the channel, but only if you genuinely appreciate the misery I curate here. While you're at it, let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is for you. I'm always fascinated to see which corners of the globe are joining our historical suffering. Now, dim those lights, perhaps activate a fan for a soft, industrial background hum, and let's carefully step into tonight's grim adventure. Your inaugural shift as a Victorian factory hand commences precisely the way all Victorian tragedies inevitably do, with a bell. Not the gentle, optimistic chime of a country church. No, this bell shatters the morning like a metallic shriek. It rings as if personally offended that you possess the audacity to still draw breath. The sun, finding the whole scene utterly distasteful, has flatly refused to participate, leaving the world shrouded in pitch darkness. Even the rats, who frequently pull double night shifts, are still nestled in their slumber. But you are compelled to rise. You painfully extricate yourself from a straw mattress that feels suspiciously like a potato sack aggressively filled with regrets and sharp, misplaced objects. Your spine audibly protests, emitting a cracking sound like a very old wooden door finally yielding to decay. Your joints dispatch an urgent message that translates roughly to, "Under what pretense are we undertaking this?" Your breath instantly precipitates into a visible white cloud in the freezing air. Indeed, you are so acutely cold that you are spontaneously generating your own special effects. As the bacchanalia swelled in number and intensity, the rites no longer fit neatly into forest clearings or vineyard edges. Some gatherings moved underground, literally. Worshippers met in secluded grottos, abandoned storerooms, or chambers carved into hillsides where the echo of chanting wrapped around the stone like a living presence. These hidden spaces amplified the atmosphere. Close air thick with incense, flickering torch light casting monstrous shadows, masks staring from the darkness like spirits caught between worlds. Secrecy became not just a feature of the cult, but its lifeblood. The secrecy wasn't born of guilt. It was born of protection. Rome frowned on gatherings it couldn't supervise, especially ones where people of all classes mingled as equals. To safeguard their rights, Bakshik followers adopted oaths of silence. New initiates swore never to reveal what happened within the circle once the torches were lit. Breaking that vow meant exile from the group or worse, divine punishment. Some initiates claimed that Bacchus himself shadowed the meetings, watching from the corners of the chamber, ensuring loyalty through a presence felt but unseen. Initiation ceremonies were elaborate. A newcomer entered blindfolded, guided by the hands of those already within the cult. Their first steps into the chamber symbolized leaving the rigid Roman world behind. They were offered a cup of wine, effectively a pledge of trust, and led to touch sacred objects. Vines, animal skins, ceremonial daggers, wooden masks blessed with oils. Each object represented a facet of Bacchus, life, wilderness, transformation, and release. Only after this tactile journey did the blindfold come off, revealing the circle of worshippers waiting, masked and silent, ready to welcome the initiate into their ecstatic fold. This growing network of secret locations and vows created something Rome feared far more than indulgence. Unity. Your breakfast consists of yesterday's stale bread, a loaf that has somehow achieved the structural density of a medieval impact weapon. You attempt to bite it, and your teeth collectively file an official, vigorous protest. There is no butter, no jam, and certainly no coffee, for caffeine is a high-cost luxury reserved solely for the affluent and the notoriously French. Victorian workers, therefore, commenced their day fueled entirely by the grim, singular necessity of survival instinct and pure, unadulterated negativity. You dress in attire that can only be accurately described as historically, aggressively itchy. Every single thread feels deliberately engineered by someone who harbored a profound resentment for human dermis. These clothes are stiff, oppressively heavy, and steeped in the combined, accumulated sins of every previous wearer. Stepping outside, you mentally prepare to embrace the day and immediately reconsider every single decision that has ever led you to this precise geographic location. The air is a truly charming industrial blend, a noxious cocktail of pulverized soot, thick coal smoke, heavy damp fog, and an indefinable atmospheric quality best described as urban melancholy. A nearby citizen unleashes a powerful, chest-deep cough, and the sound reverberates down the street like a haunted, wheezing accordion. A child sprints past you, already perilously late for their 12-hour tour, because in Victorian England, the concept of childhood functioned more as a cruel rumor than an actual demographic reality. The treacherous street beneath your feet is slick with a viscous, unidentified slime. Your shoes, which are functionally nothing more than sodden cardboard loosely held together by a fading glimmer of hope, soak through instantaneously. Congratulations! Your morning now begins with the light, localized sensation of trench foot. A unified group acting outside state oversight was dangerous regardless of its purpose. And the backsheik rights had become a haven not just for pleasure seekers, but for those dissatisfied with Roman authority. Enslaved people dreaming of freedom, wives trapped in loveless households, outcasts searching for belonging. The chambers offered anonymity, equality, and the intoxicating feeling of stepping outside Rome's iron grip. But the deeper the secrecy, the more vivid the rumors became. Whispers of conspiracies, dark magic, poisonings, and even political plots began to circulate. None of it was proven. Much of it was slander. But perception mattered more than truth. And soon, Rome's perception turned deadly. By the early 2nd century BCE, the Bacchanalia had grown far beyond the quiet cult Rome once tolerated. Reports, most exaggerated, some outright invented, reached the Senate describing scenes of chaos, seduction, night-long frenzies, and secret gatherings numbering in the thousands. In a society obsessed with control, nothing was more terrifying than what it could not monitor. And so Rome did what it always did. When confronted with something that defied its rigid order, it panicked. The turning point came when a former initiate, driven by fear or ambition, approached the authorities with a tale that ignited wildfire. He claimed the Bacchanalia were no longer mere rites, but breeding grounds for treason, murder, and moral corruption. He insisted that worshippers forged alliances behind closed doors, plotted against families, exchanged illicit vows, and even committed crimes under the veil of divine frenzy. Whether he believed his own accusations remains uncertain. What is clear is that the Senate seized upon them with desperate enthusiasm. This was not truly about immorality. It was about power. Then, the factory bell detonates again. Louder this time, as if it has internalized your hesitation and taken deep personal offense. You quicken your pace, driven not by any actual desire to work, but by the cold, hard reality that Victorian foremen are effectively authorized to scream at you until your very soul chooses to spontaneously abandon your physical vessel. The worst part? You haven't even reached the factory yet. You haven't seen the monstrous machines. You haven't inhaled the primary, life-reducing dust. You haven't even met the foreman, a man whose entire personality is distilled unseasoned boiled potato. It is still the very beginning of the morning, and already your internal monologue is screaming, "No, I cannot survive this. I must return to my straw sack." Your commute to the factory is hardly a refreshing morning constitutional. There is no glorious sunrise, no cheerful bird song, and no neighbor foolish enough to wish you a genuinely lovely day. Instead, you emerge onto a Victorian streetscape that strongly resembles a deleted, particularly morbid scene from a Gothic horror novel. The fog is so intensely thick that it possesses physical mass, the color of wet, neglected cement, and it carries the delightful, heavy bouquet of Industrial Revolution blended with a hint of unresolved respiratory failure. The ground beneath you is less a functional road and more a liquefied slurry, a mud and soot smoothie. Every desperate footstep threatens to strip the shoe from your foot entirely, which would be a catastrophe, considering Victorian shoes cost approximately 2 years of wages yet provide precisely zero measurable warmth. As you navigate this treacherous landscape, you encounter the local fauna. Rats the unsettling size of overly large emotional support dogs. They exhibit no fear of you. They do not scatter or run. They simply regard you with a knowing stare, communicating telepathically, "Ah, you're headed to the factory. Rough, isn't it?" The Bacchanalia had become a parallel society, one where senators held no sway, where women possessed unprecedented influence, where slaves mingled freely with freeborn men, and where individuals acted without deference to Rome's hierarchy. That terrified the ruling class far more than rumors of drunken rites. A cult that ignored social boundaries threatened the very architecture of Roman authority. And so the Senate turned the situation into a full moral crisis. They portrayed the Bacchanalia as a contagion infecting the city, a plague of hysteria that endangered families, virtue, and even the stability of the state. The rhetoric grew increasingly dramatic. Claims of human sacrifice, coerced initiation, mass orgies, forged wills, and poisonings. Livy, writing later, exaggerated it further into a tale of absolute depravity. Likely more propaganda than history, but propaganda works best when the public is already afraid. Parents began forbidding their children from leaving home at night. Husbands accused wives of secret participation. Rumors spread through markets and baths, each story more lurid than the last. People whispered that Bacchus himself was rising against Rome, corrupting minds with wine and frenzy. For the Senate, this fear was useful. It allowed them to tighten control, assert moral authority, and justify extreme action. The Bacchanalia were no longer viewed as religious rites, but as an existential threat to Roman civilization itself. And once Rome named something a threat, destruction becomes inevitable. In 186 BCE, fear finally crystallized into violence. The Senate issued the Senatus Consultum de Bacchanalibus, one of the harshest religious crackdowns in Roman history. It declared the Bacchanalia illegal unless explicitly approved by the state, which was essentially never granted. Overnight, a festival once devoted to joy, ecstasy, and divine communion was transformed by decree into a crime. Even the vermin pity you, and that serves as the clearest possible indictment of your current situation. You pass rows of dilapidated, cramped houses where families of 8 routinely coexist in a single room, sharing the same stagnant air, the same rapidly spreading diseases, and the same questionable life choices. Laundry hangs limply in the damp, heavy air, perpetually dripping onto the street, since direct sunlight has apparently not visited this neighborhood since the reign of a monarch named George. Children who should logically be sleeping, attending school, or literally engaging in any activity other than this, scurry past you, clutching various sharp tools. Some look as heartbreakingly young as 5. At that age today, children are meticulously learning their colors and shapes. In Victorian England, they are focused on perfecting the technique required to avoid being fatally pulled into industrial machinery. Adorable in the most profoundly tragic way. The nearer you get to your destination, the darker the sky becomes, not due to weather patterns, but entirely because of the overwhelming industrial smoke. It is an actual artificial, man-made night. Chimneys belch dense, black fumes into the atmosphere like gargantuan dragons suffering from a severe sinus infection. After just 2 minutes in this environment, your lungs feel as though they are prematurely aging in dog years. As you cross a narrow, unsteady bridge, you glance down at the river, which was formerly classified as water, but is now an unidentifiable, bubbling soup of noxious chemicals, dead aquatic life, and sheer regret. It bubbles. Water, you realize, should not bubble unless actively heated. You make a vital mental note. Never fall into that river, unless your immediate goal is to acquire spontaneous superpowers or achieve instantaneous, messy death. And then, just when you think the misery quotient cannot possibly be increased, the factory bell rings again. Rome, the great appropriator of foreign gods, had found one it refused to absorb. The crackdown unfolded with brutal efficiency. Magistrates stormed grottos, vineyards, and private homes rumored to house Bakshik altars. Torches illuminated scenes of chaos, masks torn from walls, sacred vines ripped from ceilings, ceremonial drums trampled under soldiers' boots. Worshippers who had gathered peacefully were seized in chains. dragged into the streets as examples of Rome's restored order. Some begged, some resisted. Others remained eerily calm, still under the fading spell of Bacchus, whispering prayers as soldiers hauled them away. The Senate framed this purge as a purification, a cleansing of moral pollution. But to those inside the cult, it was nothing short of religious persecution. Trials were swift and often symbolic. Thousands were investigated. Many were executed. Some hanged, some thrown from cliffs. Others publicly displayed to warn any who dared to revive the rites. Women, once the heart of Bakshik worship, suffered especially harsh judgment. The state accused them of seducing men into treason, corrupting households, and spreading disorder beneath Rome's foundations. Their supposed moral weakness became Rome's convenient justification for oppression. Not all followers submitted. Many resisted in small, defiant ways, hiding masks beneath floorboards, burying wine cups marked with ivy, memorizing hymns so no physical evidence remained. Some fled into the countryside, worshipping in secret, hoping the god would protect them. Others smuggled sacred objects to distant regions where Roman scrutiny was weaker. These pockets of survival kept the Bakshik spirit alive even as Rome proclaimed it extinguished. The Senate's victory was incomplete, and that frustrated them. They could destroy altars but not memory. They could punish bodies but not faith. Still, for a time Rome appeared to reestablish control. Loud, gratingly metallic, and undeniably full of existential disappointment. Your pace instantly quickens, compelled not by enthusiasm, but by the acute, visceral fear of the foreman spotting your potential tardiness. A man whose entire personality is a precise blend of 90% raw anger and 10% brimmed hat. By the time you finally stumble up to the factory gates, your cardboard shoes are irrevocably soaked, your lungs are already deeply compromised, your mood is plumbing the lowest depths, and your spirit is gently, noticeably leaking out of your ears. And this, remember, was just the transit. You have not yet started your official shift. Having somehow survived the Victorian commute, a logistical feat that arguably deserves a national medal, you finally approach the formidable building where your youthful dreams and functional spinal alignment will assuredly go to expire. The factory itself. It looms out of the pervasive smog like a colossal brick mountain, clearly designed by an architect who harbored a deep, abiding hatred for windows, oxygen, and human joy. The structure is impossibly huge, aggressively imposing, and somehow manages the unsettling trick of looking both utterly abandoned and dangerously overcrowded simultaneously. The very first thing that assaults your awareness is the noise. You cannot yet see the operational machinery, but you certainly hear it. A distant, constant metallic roaring that sounds precisely like a major thunderstorm being brutally attacked by an army of angry kitchen utensils. It is a deafening, continuous chorus of clanks, violent bangs, grinding whirs, and the frequent, startling scream of a steam pipe that releases pressure in a way that suggests it, too, is profoundly emotionally stressed. Your eardrums immediately attempt to formally resign from your body. The factory doors are themselves heavy, unyielding iron slabs, the kind of doors you might expect to find guarding a medieval dungeon or the entrance to a maximum security prison. The official narrative declared order restored, corruption cleansed, danger eliminated. But beneath that triumphant veneer, something far more complex simmered. A wounded population mourning the loss of a god who had offered them freedom. Rome had won militarily, but spiritually, emotionally, the battle had only begun. And in the shadows, Bacchus waited. Despite Rome's aggressive campaign to erase the Bacchanalia, the cult did not disappear. It adapted. Suppression only sharpened its instincts for secrecy. What had once been vibrant festivals with music and torches now transformed into whispered rituals, practiced by scattered pockets of believers who refused to abandon the God who had given them liberation. The Senate could outlaw gatherings, destroy altars, and execute leaders, but it could not kill longing. And longing is where Bacchus lived strongest. Survivors carried what they could of the old rites into hidden corners of their lives. A vine symbol carved inside a ring, a scrap of ivy tucked into a tunic, a quiet toast made at dusk, head bowed, whispering a prayer that once would have been shouted under the moon. Women especially kept the cult alive within families. Some taught their daughters hymns disguised as lullabies. Others held private rites inside closed rooms using a single cup of wine and a handful of grapes in place of the ecstatic feasts of earlier days. The music was gone, the frenzy absent, but the devotion remained intact, compressed, not broken. Outside the city, the cult found more fertile ground. In the countryside, where Rome's surveillance waned and villagers clung to older gods, Bacchus was welcomed back with little hesitation. Traveling merchants carried stories of persecution that transformed Bacchus into a kind of outlaw deity, one who understood suffering, resistance, and the hunger for freedom. This new interpretation only strengthened the bond between god and follower. Bacchus was no longer just the patron of wine. You hesitate even to touch them, as they radiate the distinct, unsettling energy of something that has been the unwilling witness to unthinkable things, specifically involving detached human digits. Once you manage to push inside, you are instantly slammed by a physical wall of penetrating heat, debilitating noise, and airborne grime so dense it practically possesses its own gravitational pull and personality. The interior space is intensely dim, illuminated only by small, high windows that are somehow both irreparably cracked and thickly coated in filth. Dust hangs suspended in the humid air as if it is actively paying rent. Workers move through the suffocating haze like pallid ghosts burdened with unresolved union grievances. The floor is uneven, treacherous, and coated in a slick, dark layer of oil, coal dust, metal shavings, and various other substances you instinctively choose not to identify for the sake of your immediate emotional well-being. Every step you take feels like a dangerous, uninsurable gamble, and every gamble feels like a potential liability lawsuit, a concept which, sadly, does not yet exist. Your initial, profound instinct is to immediately turn around and flee, perhaps run, perhaps try to relocate to a completely different century. But alas, no, the foreman has spotted you. He is a man who appears to have been physically carved entirely out of scowls, ambient stress, and crystallized Victorian misery. His sole professional mandate is to glare at workers until they dramatically increase their speed, and he performs this task with chilling excellence. He fixes you with a look that clearly conveys, "If you even harbor the thought of leaving, I will personally invent new, crushing forms of disappointment just for you." You steal a quick glance at the operational machinery and instantly regret every single decision that has ever led you to this moment. He became a symbol of rebellion, a spiritual refuge for anyone living under the boot of Roman authority. Meanwhile, in Greece and southern Italy, where Dionysian worship predated Rome itself, the crackdown was largely ignored. Local communities continued their rites with minor adjustments to avoid provoking Roman officials. Over time, these surviving traditions blended with the remnants of the original Bacchanalia. What emerged was a more restrained but enduring form of devotion, one that emphasized theater, procession, and symbolic ecstasy rather than frenzied possession. The spirit of the cult remained alive, even if the volume had been turned down. The Senate had expected obedience, not endurance. The continued survival of Bacchic worship proved something Rome was always reluctant to admit. People need spaces where the rigid boundaries of society soften, where joy is not a luxury but a right, and where the divine is not distant but intimate. And as long as humans needed that, Bacchus would never truly vanish. In the centuries that followed the crackdown, Rome changed, but Bacchus remained. Not always in his old wild form, of course. Time softened him, reshaped him, and dressed him in new rituals, new names, new expressions. But the core of the cult, the desire for liberation, ecstasy, and union with a force greater than oneself, drifted into every corner of Mediterranean culture. The Bacchanalia may have been outlawed, but their spirit slipped through the cracks of civilization like wine seeping into the grain of a wooden cup. As Rome expanded, it absorbed countless traditions. And ironically, even the suppressed Bacchic rites evolved into socially acceptable festivals. Public spectacles like the Liberalia and dramatic performances rooted in Dionysian theater kept fragments of the old worship alive. Looms, monstrous gears, thick leather belts, and heavy presses. All are enormous, all are ear-splittingly loud, and all appear to be powered by a volatile combination of raw steam and pure spite. Every machine unit looks one badly timed blink away from spontaneously removing an important, irreplaceable part of your body. And the official shift has not yet even begun. Standing there, choking in the smoke, listening to this metallic orchestra of doom, you arrive at one profound, terrifying realization. You absolutely do not belong here. Your modern brain desperately whispers, "Nope." Your lungs weakly whisper, "Goodbye." And your heart plaintively whispers, "Is it too late to pursue a career as a baker instead?" But it is irrevocably too late. Welcome to the factory. You, as a modern individual, might rationally expect some form of structured orientation on your first day inside a Victorian factory. Perhaps a friendly, helpful supervisor, a detailed instructional pamphlet, or even a demonstration video featuring a cheerful man carefully explaining the essential safety procedures. No, absolutely not. This is the Victorian era, a time of blunt reality. The only safety orientation you are currently receiving is a fleeting, shouted warning. Asterisk, do not stand excessively close to things that spin rapidly. Asterisk, your entire professional training commences when a foreman points a rigid finger toward a massive machine unit, the rough size of a horse-drawn carriage, and utters 4 definitive words. Right, you operate that. That is it. Those 4 words constitute your syllabus, your operations handbook, and your entire educational framework. You stare blankly at the machine. The machine stares back, menacingly. And somewhere, deep within your subconscious, a tiny, tired voice whispers, "It's been a reasonably good life." Victorian machinery, it must be noted, is not designed to be friendly or accommodating. It is not conveniently labeled. It is not color-coded for ease of use. Actors wearing masks, once tools of back-chic immersion, now trod the wooden stages of Roman theaters, invoking the same primal emotions under the guise of art rather than religion. The ecstatic frenzy of the old rites transformed into choreographed dances, ritual songs, and poetic celebrations of the vine. The state had tamed Bacchus, but could not erase him. Even in early Christianity's rise, echoes of Dionysian symbolism persisted. Wine remained a sacred element. Ritual communion, drinking to experience divine presence, mirrored the spiritual logic of the Bacchanalia far more than Rome's senators would ever admit. The idea that the divine could enter the human body through ritual consumption was not new. The Bacchic worshippers had practiced it centuries before. While the Church rejected the chaos associated with Bacchus, it inherited something deeper. The belief that spiritual transformation could be intimate, emotional, and embodied. In medieval Europe, the figure of Bacchus survived in art, poetry, and folklore. Painters revived him as a symbol of pleasure, rebellion, and the human craving for release from constraint. Renaissance scholars rediscovering ancient texts recast him as a complex deity, not merely the god of drunken excess, but a force of creativity, inspiration, and liberation. Writers described him as the divine spark that dissolves fear, awakens passion, and reveals truths hidden by everyday life. Today, the name Bacchanalia has become shorthand for unrestrained celebration. But beneath the caricature lies a profound truth. The ancient worshippers were seeking more than wine or frenzy. They were seeking freedom, the right to feel deeply, to break free from imposed identities, to touch the divine without intermediaries. Rome silenced the drums, broke the altars, scattered the worshippers. But the longing that created the Bacchanalia never died. And in that longing, Bacchus still lives. It absolutely does not feature a helpful, oversized emergency stop button. It is, instead, a terrifying tangled mass of greasy gears, taut leather drive belts, slamming pistons, and scalding steam pipes, all screaming chaotically for attention and occasionally spitting hot, painful droplets at you like a squad of angry, mechanical llamas. Your assigned function is to keep the entire system running smoothly, an optimistic proposition considering you have zero idea what half the parts are supposed to be doing. Perhaps you suspect no one truly does. A fellow worker approaches you, an older man visibly missing 3 fingers and the vast majority of his enthusiasm for existence. This is your designated mentor. He manages to shout his instruction above the industrial din. "Don't let your sleeve get caught." He then immediately turns his back because, frankly, that single sentence covers the bulk of the training curriculum. You nod politely, trying to appear competent, as if this single, crucial warning will somehow shield you from the 18 other imaginative ways the machine has planned to permanently injure you. You attempt to focus on the motions of the seasoned workers around you, but they move with the frantic speed and weary precision of people who long ago accepted their fate. They grab, pull, crank, feed, push, and twist, all in a complex, high-speed sequence so intricate it might as well be a desperate, highly specialized dance performed as a dire warning to future generations. The foreman strides past again, fixing you with the intensity of a man who believes that any lapse in efficiency is a deeply personal insult. He bellows, "Faster!" even though you still haven't clearly identified which part of the colossal machine is the primary work mechanism. You would love to ask probing questions, but asking questions implies curiosity, and curiosity implies you are new. As the night deepened, and the wine settled into that perfect middle ground between clarity and haze, the symposium shifted into its most famous role, a crucible for ideas. This was the hour when conversations sharpened, when laughter thinned into thoughtful silence, and when the air thickened with the weight of questions that had no simple answers. Politics and philosophy were not dry subjects here. They were living creatures wrestled with, teased, provoked, and sometimes serenaded into revealing their secrets. Politics entered the room first, usually through a casual remark, a complaint about a magistrate, a rumor about a military campaign, or a sly comment about a rival city-state. What began as gossip quickly expanded into the broader world. Athenian democracy, Spartan discipline, Persian ambition, Corinthian trade, all these topics swirled into the conversation. Guests dissected policies, debated leaders, and critiqued decisions with the boldness that only wine could inspire. The symposium was a political classroom without consequences, a place where ideas could be tested without fear of public backlash. Then came philosophy, sweeping into the room like a cold breeze from Mount Olympus. Someone posed a question, not a simple one, but the kind that pressed against the boundaries of human understanding. What is virtue? Is courage a matter of action or intention? Does the soul exist? And if so, where does it reside? What makes a life worth living? The guests leaned in, eyes glinting with curiosity. The symposium was the birthplace of countless philosophical pathways, some playful, some profound, some destined to echo through history. This was the world that gave us Socrates reclining on a couch, challenging his companions with relentless logic. It was the world where Plato, years later, would stage entire dialogues. The symposium turned thought into theater. Every man was an actor, every argument a scene, every insight a plot twist. If they confirm you are new, they might just assign you to a demonstrably more dangerous station, such as feeding raw material into the machine affectionately nicknamed the hand collector. Every passing second you spend attempting to internalize this orientation drastically lowers your immediate life expectancy. Your pulse rate skyrockets, your palms begin to slick with cold sweat, your heavy clothing instantly becomes a painful liability, and your eyes dart around the space like you are expecting a hidden trap door to spring open at any moment. In this paralyzing moment, standing before a monstrous Victorian machine with absolutely nothing but pure anxiety and the ability to count your remaining fingers as your guide, you realize your real orientation is not try not to die. It is, chillingly, try not to die yet. Now that you have successfully survived orientation, which amounted to someone shouting, "Don't lose a limb," over the deafening industrial scream, it is time to formally introduce yourself to your new co-workers, the Victorian machines. These mechanical beasts are colossal, relentlessly steam-powered, and constructed with all the empathy and nuanced understanding of a tax auditor conducting an audit during a global famine. Modern machinery beeps with polite guidance, offers digital tips, and stops automatically if you so much as sneeze near it. Victorian machines, however, operate on a profoundly different engineering philosophy, one that can be succinctly summarized as, asterisk if it moves, ruthlessly crush it. If it doesn't move, aggressively crush it anyway. The first time you hesitantly reach toward the machine with visibly trembling hands, you immediately become aware of the collection of grim warning signs surrounding you. Not the brightly painted kind. Those simply did not exist yet. No, the warnings materialize in the form of your coworker's visible, missing fingers. One man is short a thumb, Another has lost two crucial fingertips. Participants disagreed fiercely, but rarely maliciously. A clever rebuttal drew applause. A flawed argument invited teasing. Truth-seeking was a shared performance, not a solitary pursuit. The beauty of symposium philosophy was its freedom. There were no rigid schools yet, no textbooks, no formal examinations. Thought unfolded naturally, shaped by wine, friendship, and the slow-burning fire of curiosity. The Andron became a miniature universe where the laws of the city loosened and the laws of reason tightened. By the time voices grew soft and eyelids heavy, men often left the symposium changed. Not just entertained, not just relaxed, but stretched, mentally widened by the ideas exchanged in the glow of torchlight and silver cups. Wisdom in Greece wasn't born in temples or courts. It was born in rooms like these. Though symposia were officially gatherings for elite men, the reality was far more nuanced and far more interesting. Into this world of wine, poetry, and philosophical combat stepped women known not for domestic roles, but for intellect, wit, and artistic skill. The hetaira. These courtesans were nothing like the wives confined to the private quarters of the household. They were educated, charismatic, and often sharper in conversation than the men reclining beside them. Their presence shifted the social chemistry of the symposium entirely, adding layers of intrigue, inspiration, and tension to the night. A hetaira could read poetry, play the lyre, challenge arguments, and offer commentary bold enough to make even seasoned thinkers pause. Unlike respectable women, she moved freely in male intellectual circles, navigating complex conversations with grace and strategy. Men invited hetaira not simply for beauty, though their appearance mattered, but because their presence enlivened the room. They broke the monotony of all-male debates and brought a playful, unpredictable spark that ignited new lines of thinking. And the veteran worker immediately adjacent to you appears to have lost something so substantial, so long ago, that he cannot even precisely recall which specific part it was. Machines in this era were largely driven by thick leather belts. Spinning at such incredible velocities, they practically transcended the physical realm and became philosophical concepts. One moment, there is a distinct, visible belt. The very next moment, it is merely a terrifying blur, easily capable of instantaneously removing your sleeve, your dignity, and your entire arm in a single, silent swoop. You attempt to keep your stiff clothing meticulously tucked in, but Victorian fabric possesses no known stretch, no flexibility, and absolutely no interest in mechanical teamwork. If your shirt catches on a moving part, be assured, it is taking you with it. You attempt to regain focus, feeding the raw material into the insatiable machine as you were crudely instructed. The gears scream as they grind, the pistons pump violently, and every single metallic clank feels like a personal, existential threat aimed solely at you. The entire mechanism vibrates the floor in a deeply unstable manner, suggesting it is held together only by high-grade rust, desperate hope, and collective passive aggression. Occasionally, someone will scream a generic, frantic warning, such as, "Watch your hands," or "Mind the blasted gears." Advice that would be genuinely useful if you weren't already fully committed, body and soul, to keeping every part of yourself physically intact. The problem is, Victorian machines harbor no regard whatsoever for your commitment. They possess an uncanny ability to sense weakness. They can literally smell fear. And you, right now, are generating fear at factory scale. At one point, your sleeve brushes just a fraction too close to a rapidly spinning cog. Time immediately decelerates. A sharp remark from a clever courtesan could deflate arrogance or redirect a stalled argument more effectively than any amount of wine. These women also held social power. A well-known hetaira carried connections across cities, households, and political factions. Her support or her criticism could influence a man's reputation more subtly than any speech in the assembly. Some were confidants to generals, lovers to philosophers, or muses to poets whose verses outlived entire city-states. Their role was not merely decorative, it was transformative. They shaped the emotional and intellectual climate of the symposium as much as the wine mixture or the evening's chosen games. Beyond the courtesans, entertainers also played essential roles. Dancers, flute players, acrobats, and performers brought spectacle to the night, blurring the line between ritual and theater. Their skills added atmosphere but also contrast. While philosophers sparred over the soul's immortality, a dancer's fluid movement reminded everyone that the body too held its own kind of truth. Importantly, the presence of Hetaira created a space where desire, intellect, and social performance intertwined. They were not passive guests, but participants who understood the symposium's deeper dynamics, how ideas, egos, and emotions blended into a single shifting current. Their laughter could lift the room, their silence could sharpen it. In this alchemy of presence, the symposium became more than a philosophical salon. It became a living ecosystem where gender, intellect, and desire collided in ways that could reshape alliances, inspire art, or alter the course of a man's ambitions. Beneath all the laughter, debate, games, and seduction, the symposium was still a ritual space, one quietly supervised by Dionysus himself. The Greeks did not see drinking as a frivolous act. It was sacred. Wine was a gift from the god who blurred boundaries between joy and madness, order and chaos, mortal and divine. You witness your entire past life flash before your eyes, including memories you didn't even realize you possessed. Like that time you genuinely cried over dropping a perfectly good sandwich. You yank your arm away just fractions of a second too late, and a seasoned coworker nods curtly in a dark acknowledgement, as if you have successfully completed a very grim, unofficial rite of passage. You overhear that one specific machine unit in the corner has been affectionately nicknamed the Nibbler. You wisely choose not to ask why. By midday, you have achieved a clear understanding of why Victorian workers never permitted themselves to become emotionally attached to their fingers. The machines simply wanted them more. Take a deep breath. Actually, scratch that. Do not. Not inside a Victorian factory environment. The atmosphere within this space is not air. It is a hostile, active substance. A viscous mixture, a toxic cocktail, a Victorian smoothie composed of lint dust, coal soot, scalding steam, heavy oil vapor, and the faint, unmistakable aroma of everyone else's current, profound suffering. From the moment you walked through those iron doors, your lungs have filed a serious, immediate complaint. Each desperate inhale feels alarmingly like you have accidentally consumed a handful of finely ground gravel. Each labored exhale feels like a frantic negotiation between the stubborn necessity of life and the consequences of your poor historical decisions. Breathing ceases to be an automatic function and becomes instead a strategic, energy-draining choice. You look around and realize the atmosphere actually possesses visible texture. You can clearly see millions of particles floating. Cotton lint if you are in a textile mill, abrasive metal dust if you work with heavy machinery, or pulverized coal soot if the factory is powered by a menacing steam engine that looks one misplaced spark away from achieving national disaster. And so every symposium began with a libation, a small offering of wine poured onto the floor or into a designated bowl. This simple gesture reminded everyone that the evening was not purely human. Dionysus watched. Dionysus listened. Dionysus judged. The ritual framed the entire event. It asked guests to drink with intention, not indulgence, to let the wine open their minds, not overwhelm them. The Greeks believed Dionysus granted inspiration, the kind that could touch poetry, philosophy, or even political strategy. A man who drank too much lost that divine spark and fell into foolishness. A man who drank wisely became, in a sense, a vessel for revelation. Moderation, paradoxically, was how one courted the god of ecstasy. Symbols of Dionysus decorated the andron. Ivy crowning the guests, painted kylikes showing satyrs tumbling through forests, mosaics of grapevines curling across the floor. These images were not random decor. They were reminders that every guest walked a tightrope between order and excess. The symposium functioned as a controlled descent into Dionysian energy, a safe version of the wild Bakshik rites, refined into an intellectual ritual for the elite. Even the sequence of the evening followed a ritual pattern. Libation, mixing of wine, conversation, music, games, then deeper dialogue as night descended. Each stage mirrored the shifting states of consciousness Dionysus governed. The god was not invoked with shrieking frenzy, but with laughter, performance, and vulnerability. The Greeks believed that truth, philosophical, emotional, or political, was often revealed only when masks loosened and inhibitions thinned. The symposium created the ideal atmosphere for such revelations. At times, religious themes entered the discussion directly. Myths were retold, dissected, challenged. Was Dionysus truly born twice? Did he bring madness as punishment or as liberation? Did wine free the mind or expose its weaknesses? These malicious particles swirl through the dense air as if actively enjoying their freedom at the direct expense of your respiratory system. Within minutes, your throat is scratchy and parched, your eyes are uncontrollably watering, and your lungs feel like a poorly maintained, leaking accordion. Victorian workers simply designated this agonizing sensation as normal. Modern medical professionals would diagnose it as, you need to get out of there immediately. But there is no escape. Your shift is only just beginning. Workers all around you cough relentlessly. Not small, polite coughs. These are deep, wrenching coughs that echo across the factory floor like the drawn-out demise of dying bears. You hear deep, wet rattling wheezes that sound eerily like someone repeatedly attempting to start a very old, obstinate lawnmower. Nobody bothers to cover their mouth, because everyone is too preoccupied clinging desperately to a fragile thread of consciousness. And if someone coughs up something solid, well, that is a private matter strictly between them and the nearest available priest. The factory floor is also oppressively hot. Steam powers everything, so the internal temperature perpetually hovers somewhere between an uncomfortable, overcrowded sauna and a slow-boiling beef stew. You begin to sweat instantly, which might be bearable if the perspiration did not immediately combine with the omnipresent soot to generate a brand new chemical element. Victorian paste, a sticky, abrasive black coating on your skin that will never truly, fully wash off. Your lungs grow heavier and heavier. The deeper you are forced to walk into the factory, the worse the air quality becomes. By mid-morning, you are desperately trying to conserve precious oxygen like a Victorian monk practicing a highly specialized form of industrial meditation. These questions mingled with the smoke of burning incense, drifting through the room as guests debated the nature of divine influence. Ultimately, the symposium was a balancing act. It embraced a god associated with chaos but demanded structure. It invited ecstasy but insisted on intellect. It flirted with madness but never surrendered to it. In this delicate dance, the Greeks found a way to honor Dionysus without being devoured by him. When dawn crept over the horizon, and the last kylix lay empty, the symposium did not end. Transformed, what happened inside those rooms echoed far beyond the wine-stained floors of the Andron. The symposium left fingerprints on philosophy, politics, education, art, and even the way modern people gather to share ideas over food and drink. Its legacy stretches across centuries, shaping the very concept of intellectual community. The most obvious legacy lies in Greek philosophy. Many of the dialogues that define Western thought, especially those preserved by Plato, are set at symposia. The relaxed posture, the wine-induced openness, the interplay of humor and logic created conditions where bold ideas could surface. Concepts like the nature of love, the structure of the soul, and the pursuit of virtue were not forged in solemn temples. They were born among reclining friends, cups in hand, laughter swirling around profound questions. The idea that deep thinking thrives in social spaces, not only in solitude, comes straight from symposium culture. Equally lasting was the symposium's role in shaping political discourse. Greek citizens learned to argue, persuade, and critique in these rooms long before they stepped into the assembly. The freedom to speak one's mind, so central to democratic life, was rehearsed in private before it unfolded in public. Here, men tested their rhetorical skills, challenged norms, and sharpened their understanding of civic issues. You have spontaneously invented 3 entirely new coughing patterns, and you are starting to see amorphous shapes swimming in the haze. Is it the machines? Is it the foreman? Or is it merely your intrinsic will to live, abandoning your body in a visible particulate form? And there is no conceivable escape. The sparse windows are all sealed shut, bolted tight, because opening them would potentially let the outside air in, and fresh, Clean air is a luxury strictly reserved for people not currently dissolving on factory floors. By the time you reach midday, you no longer need a doctor to diagnose you. You need a functioning time machine. This isn't air. This is the Industrial Revolution's chosen, toxic method of politely advising you to go home and die elsewhere. If you believed the air quality was actively trying to kill you, wait until you experience the official soundtrack of Victorian industrialism. The factory noise is significantly less background ambience, and far more a constant, relentless, mind-numbing psychological assault. It doesn't simply echo. It physically occupies space inside your skull like it's paying the rent. The moment your foot touches the factory floor, the sound hits you with the stunning force of a thrown brick. The machines roar, clank, grind, whir, hiss, and loudly bang in a chaotic, crushing symphony that would compel even the most dedicated heavy metal bands to say, "Okay, that's just a little excessive." It's not merely loud. It is aggressive, it is physically violent. The kind of noise that flatly refuses to fade into the background, but instead forcibly becomes the dominant background track to your every subsequent nightmare. Your ears immediately begin their protest. They try desperately to fold themselves closed. They attempt to tender their resignation. They consider immigrating to a quieter, more insulated part of your head. The symposium taught them to listen as well as speak, a skill as vital today as it was in ancient Athens. The artistic legacy is just as rich. Vases depicting symposium scenes became iconic works of Greek pottery, capturing everything from elegant reclining figures to mischievous satyrs and drunken revelry. These images provide historians with insight into clothing, furniture, hairstyles, and social behavior. Music and poetry performed in symposia influenced genres that survived long after the Greek city-states fell. Even the image of the philosopher with a cup, thoughtful, reflective, slightly amused, remains a recognizable archetype. And what of modern culture? Dining together, drinking together, debating together. These practices, so central to universities, salons, literary circles, and even political gatherings, are direct descendants of symposium culture. The idea that a shared meal creates the perfect environment for honest conversation and creative thought is ancient Greek wisdom embedded in our daily lives. Whether around a dinner table, a cafe, or a quiet bar, people still recreate the essence of the symposium, mixing moderation with indulgence, intellect with laughter, friendship with inquiry. The Greeks believed that wine revealed the truth of a person, but they also believed truth needed companionship to flourish. The symposium honored both, and through its rituals of conversation, performance, and philosophical play, it built a foundation for intellectual life that still shapes how we think, meet, and share ideas today. The wine has long dried, the lyre strings long silent, but the symposium lives on every time minds open over a shared cup. Apollodorus was born in Damascus at a moment in history when the city was more than a crossroads. It was a furnace of ideas. But Victorian factories contain no quiet parts, only parts that are slightly louder, and parts that are dramatically, aggressively louder. Communication with your peers is virtually impossible. If you need to speak to the person standing directly beside you, you must scream with the emotional intensity of someone confessing a deeply held lifelong secret. Even then, most of the time, they still fail to hear you. The crushing noise of the machines drowns out every other sound, including your own internal monologue, which honestly is currently a blessing because your internal monologue is currently screaming. You will, at first, attempt to shield your hearing. You will attempt to cover your ears. You will tilt your head at awkward angles. You will pray fervently to any available deity. None of it works. The noise travels directly through you, as if the factory is determined to communicate its toxic message directly to your bones. Victorian workers did not possess the luxury of functional earplugs. The closest thing they had to hearing protection was nervously stuffing tufts of raw cotton into their ears, which likely caused half the hearing problems in the first place. As the excruciating hours slowly drag on, your exhausted brain begins to adapt, and it adapts very poorly. You start imagining distinct patterns in the repetitive clanging, convinced the machines are transmitting threatening Morse code messages directly to you. One particular piston emits a noise that, if you listen long enough, unsettlingly resembles laughter. That is the moment you realize the machines are not just loud. They are actively, cruelly mocking your helplessness. Your nerves fray completely. Your shoulders tense into immovable blocks. Your grasp on sanity visibly loosens. Time becomes a completely irrelevant concept. Your internal thoughts blur into one continuous, desperate, primal plea for silence. But the machines hold no regard for your suffering. Traders from the Persian East passed through its gates carrying not only fabrics and spices, but knowledge, irrigation techniques, stone-cutting traditions, and mathematical principles refined over centuries. Greek settlers brought their own architectural vocabulary, proportions, symmetry, and a belief that beauty was inseparable from geometry. And perched above both influences stood Rome, expanding ever outward, hungry for talent wherever it could find it. Damascus was not just influenced by these worlds. It blended them into something entirely its own. This was the vibrant, complex world in which Apollodorus first opened his eyes. From an early age, he was surrounded by stone. Damascus was a city that built with confidence. Its arches were daring, its aqueducts precise, its temples a marriage of local craftsmanship and foreign inspiration. Young Apollodorus watched masons at work the way poets watch sunsets. He studied how water carved its own path through engineered channels and how Persian vaulting techniques allowed structures to rise higher with less material. For him, architecture was never merely construction. It was performance, calculation, and storytelling all at once. His earliest teachers were not philosophers in formal schools, but builders, craftsmen whose hands were calloused from shaping the physical world. They taught him how a single error in measurement could doom an entire structure, and how a well-designed arch could lift more than any human army. These practical lessons intertwined with the Greek texts he studied, treatises on mechanics, geometry, and the sacred proportions of temples. Damascus gave him access to knowledge from every direction, and he absorbed it all like dry stone drinking water. By adolescence, Apollodorus had developed the rarest gift an architect can possess: the ability to imagine in 3 dimensions. They are fueled by steam, low-grade coal, and pure, concentrated spite, and they will continue screaming until the end of your shift or the total collapse of civilization. Victorian workers frequently went deaf slowly. You, however, are going deaf immediately and possibly emotionally as well. By the conclusion of Hour 1, you don't just desire silence. You crave comprehensive, industrialized revenge. Just when you are thoroughly convinced that the machinery constitutes the worst possible threat within the factory walls, something far more demoralizing enters your field of vision: the supervisor. Victorian supervisors were never selected or hired for qualities like communication skills, emotional warmth, or employee retention. They were, instead, exclusively chosen for highly specific attributes such as chronic, low-grade unhappiness, the psychic ability to glare through structural walls, and a voice that could slice through heavy industrial noise and human hope simultaneously. Your supervisor silently materializes out of the haze of steam and dust like an underpaid, deeply irritable Victorian ghost. His posture is unnaturally rigid. His overall expression is bleak and condemning, and his eyebrows seem permanently fused into the "I'm profoundly disappointed in you" position. You have not even had the misfortune of formally meeting him yet, but somehow, deep in your gut, you already feel like you owe him a significant sum of money. His clothing is sparse. Dusty, utilitarian trousers, a simple waistcoat, and heavy boots that have stomped over countless broken dreams. But what truly defines him is his inescapable authority aura. This aura actively radiates stress and judgment. Workers immediately straighten their posture the instant he walks by, moving with the manic speed and palpable panic normally reserved for imminent natural disasters. The foreman does not smile. He does not blink unnecessarily. He simply judges. His preferred version of encouragement? *faster. He didn't just sketch buildings. He walked through them in his mind, tracing how light would fall at dawn, how crowds would move on festival days, how water would sound as it rushed through hidden channels. His mentors quickly realized they were no longer teaching a student. They were witnessing the rise of a prodigy. In a world where most architects served cities, Apollodorus dreamed of empires. Rome, with its endless appetite for monuments, roads, bridges, and forums, called to him like destiny. And though he did not yet know it, his Syrian-Greek upbringing and the Persian engineering legacy beneath it would one day reshape the capital of the Roman world itself. When Apollodorus finally made his way westward, Rome was not simply a city. It was a construction site on the scale of a civilization. The Flavian dynasty had just completed the Colosseum. The Forum was a perpetual work in progress, and emperors were competing to outdo their predecessors with larger, taller, and more technically demanding monuments. Rome devoured marble, swallowed stone, and burned through architects faster than most cities went through grain. It was the perfect place for a mind like Apollodorus to detonate. Yet Rome was also notoriously hostile to outsiders. Syrian-Greek architects were not supposed to outshine Roman-born engineers. They were expected to obey, not innovate. But Apollodorus was not built for quiet competence. He walked into the capital with the confidence of a man who understood precisely what he could offer. Designs Rome had never seen, techniques rooted in Persian and Near Eastern engineering, and a mathematical boldness that could push Roman architecture beyond its limits. Rome did not need another draftsman. It needed a visionary, and Apollodorus stepped into that role effortlessly. He didn't begin with grand monuments. Asterisk his preferred version of constructive feedback. Asterisk you're doing it wrong. Asterisk his preferred version of empathy. Asterisk we don't pay you to think. Asterisk he approaches you slowly, with the deliberate gait of a predator who is annoyed he has to expend the energy to chase his meal. You try desperately to appear natural and productive, a difficult feat since you do not know what natural looks like when you are surrounded by death machines. Sweat begins to drip freely down your back. Your hands shake uncontrollably. You briefly contemplate making eye contact, then instantly regret the treasonous thought. Eye contact is precisely how he detects fear. When he finally chooses to speak to you, it is not a greeting or an introduction. It is a harsh warning thinly disguised as a query. Is that the absolute best you can manage? Your soul temporarily vacates your body. He points a rigid finger at your machine and shouts useless, non-specific tips. Don't jam it, and keep it moving. You nod obediently, even though you have no idea whose fault it is when the machine abruptly decides it hates productivity and halts just for malicious fun. Around you, the seasoned workers move with robotic, precise movements, expertly feigning an air of competence and pretending they are not utterly terrified. They have been here long enough to understand that the supervisor senses weakness the way a shark instantly detects blood in the water. And in the rare event that someone noticeably slows down, perhaps they are injured, perhaps their soul simply fled for a brief moment, the supervisor's voice cuts through the factory din. Do you want to be replaced? The honest, internal answer is always a resounding yes, but the imminent requirement for a paycheck immediately forces the answer to be no. You realize in this moment that you might theoretically survive the noise, the suffocating dust, and even the machinery itself. But the supervisor? At first, his contributions were practical. Improved bridge designs, more efficient military fortifications, and innovations in the mechanics of siege engines. Trajan, still a rising military commander, noticed immediately. Apollodorus's solutions were not theoretical. They worked in the field. Where other engineers hesitated, he calculated. Where others proposed, he executed. And where others accepted the limits of Roman building traditions, Apollodorus reached back into the engineering knowledge of Persia and the Hellenistic world, pulling out techniques Rome had never considered. This partnership, Trajan the soldier and Apollodorus the architect, became one of the most powerful alliances in Roman history. Trajan valued talent more than pedigree, and Apollodorus valued patrons who understood ambition. Together, they reshaped the empire, starting not in marble forums, but on dusty frontiers where roads, bridges, and war machines. Once Apollodorus fell from Hadrian's grace, his world collapsed with terrifying speed. The man whose visionary designs had redefined Rome found himself suddenly uprooted, stripped of imperial protection, and cast out from the powerful circles he had once commanded. For an architect, exile was more than mere physical banishment. It was the cruel severance of his hands from the very stone that defined his identity. Apollodorus, the mastermind behind Trajan's greatest monuments, was forced into obscurity, keenly aware that his unmatched genius had become his most fatal vulnerability. Hadrian's motives were never officially confirmed, wrapped instead in vague political justifications suggesting Apollodorus had exceeded his bounds or spoken too critically. Yet, those privy to the imperial court understood the underlying truth. Hadrian could not tolerate a rival. Apollodorus was not just a superior architect. He was a potent symbol of Trajan's magnificent era, a constant, living testament to a vision Hadrian desperately struggled to match. He is the authentic, unredeemable villain of the entire Industrial Revolution. You, as a modern human with deeply ingrained concepts of workers' rights and necessary hydration needs, might believe that a lunch break represents a sacred moment to rest, regroup, and maybe regain a flicker of the will to live. In the Victorian factory, however, the lunch break is simply the abbreviated period during which you are required to continue operating machinery while simultaneously chewing something vaguely edible. The worn bell rings, signaling the commencement of this sacred window of nourishment, and by sacred, we mean a window of roughly 8 minutes, give or take how generous and distracted the supervisor is feeling that day. He never feels generous. The deafening machines do not stop. You do not stop working. Your gnawing existential dread does not stop. The only thing that manages to pause briefly is your diminishing hope. Your lunch is limited to whatever you manage to successfully carry in your pocket without it spontaneously liquefying into sludge. The meal itself consists of yesterday's loaf, now possessing the density of shale, a cold, shriveled potato, or perhaps, if you have somehow accrued a week's savings, a lump of cheese that smells potent enough to register as a certified chemical weapon. You carefully pull the ration from your pocket, blow away the fine coating of mill dust, and take a mandatory bite. It is not delicious, far from it, but it is caloric, and that singular fact is sufficient. Victorian factory workers were never afforded the dignity of a seated meal. To sit would imply rest, and rest in this environment implied a dangerous degree of humanity. Instead, every soul remains hunched like a shade over their station, consuming their meager lunch while perpetually navigating the lethal dance of the exposed machinery that might at any moment turn a simple meal break into a sudden, irreversible medical crisis. The emperor, who aspired to be seen as a philosopher-architect, simply could not endure the presence of a man whose effortless expertise constantly illuminated his own shortcomings. While in exile, Apollodorus purportedly continued to fill his notebooks, now sadly lost to history, with designs for ambitious harbors, majestic arches, improved military engines, and advanced hydraulic systems, all far ahead of their time. But no emperor would commission them. His monumental genius was locked behind political bars. The end arrived silently, yet with imperial calculation. Ancient sources claim Hadrian eventually ordered Apollodorus's execution, utilizing a fabricated charge as justification. The precise method remains unknown, but the motive was clear. Hadrian sought not merely to remove the architect from Rome, but to fully erase him from public memory. For a ruler who idealized himself as the supreme philosopher and builder, allowing a demonstrably superior mind to live was an unbearable, continuous humiliation. Thus, the greatest builder of Trajan's reign perished far from the colossal structures he had created. No dedication marked his resting place. No column was raised in his honor. Yet, even in death, Apollodorus defied total erasure. His immense, immovable, undeniable buildings, the markets, the forum, the column, the bridges, stood as silent stone witnesses, refusing to let his memory be eclipsed by imperial insecurity. Hadrian could exile the man and silence the voice, but he could not unbuild the revolutionary architecture Apollodorus had gifted the world. Apollodorus died without deserved honors or a public funeral. Yet, in a twist of historical irony more profound than any triumphal inscription, the very empire that sought to silence him ended up preserving him in the only language he truly valued, architecture. Rome may have scrubbed his name from official records, but it could not dismantle the structures built by his genius. If a piece of your bread slips and lands on the grimy floor, you face a terrifying moral quandary. Do you risk reaching for it? Do you resign yourself to starvation? Do you simply accept the universe has decreed your lunch is over? For most, the pragmatic answer is retrieval. In the outside world, this is the 5-second rule. In the Victorian factory, it is more accurately the 5-second scan rule. A quick check to ensure a bolder, cleaner rat hasn't already laid claim. The noise level is so crushing, so utterly deafening, that you cannot even hear the sound of your own mastication, which is perhaps the day's only blessing, as Victorian provisions were not designed to make pleasing sounds. Your jaw works furiously, attempting to break down bread that feels suspiciously like a load-bearing material. Meanwhile, flakes of soot and metal dust drift down, mixing into your food and adding a metallic, gritty crunch that defies all known culinary logic. Occasionally, a worker tries to share a small, weary joke or a shared smile with a neighbor, but the industrial roar consumes every syllable. Laughter is prohibited, not by management memo, but by the sheer oppressive environment. If you do manage a faint grin, it is likely a symptom of carbon monoxide poisoning or oxygen depletion. Then, just as your starved stomach begins the tentative process of recognizing the arrival of food, the foreman's presence manifests. A shadow followed by a bellowing cough. Breaks over. Your spirit sinks, collapsing within your chest. Precisely 8 minutes have elapsed. Your cold potato is still half-eaten. Your jaw aches. Your spirit is exhausted. And now you must face another 10 hours of relentless labor. Welcome to the Victorian lunch ritual. By the time the shift grinds into the afternoon, your energy reserves are entirely depleted. They command the modern skyline, defying the relentless march of time, bearing the unmistakable fingerprints of the Syrian Greek master, who shaped the Roman world more profoundly than most emperors. The Forum of Trajan remains one of antiquity's most extraordinary architectural achievements, its planning still unrivaled, its scale unmatched. The Basilica Ulpia served as a design template for civic architecture for millennia. Trajan's column continues its upward spiral in perfect mathematical harmony, its meticulously carved reliefs offering historians critical technological insight into Roman logistics and engineering. And the markets of Trajan remain, in concept and function, the prototype of the modern urban complex, a multifunctional, interconnected space designed expressly for the efficient flow of commerce and crowds. His architectural influence crossed continents and centuries. Byzantine builders adopted his complex vaulted structures. Islamic architects echoed his mastery of spatial flow and dome construction, particularly in regions near his Syrian homeland. Renaissance masters meticulously studied his clarity and proportions, borrowing his solutions for their own designs. Even contemporary architectural engineering, from reinforced arches to tiered complexes and adaptive designs on challenging terrain, can trace its intellectual lineage directly back to Apollodorus's profound innovations. But perhaps the most enduring part of his legacy is the way it exposes the cultural fiction at the heart of Rome's self-image. Roman architecture is often presented as a native Italian invention, perfected by emperors and exported globally. Apollodorus shatters that myth. His life demonstrates that Rome's greatest monuments were forged through a revolutionary synthesis: Hellenistic geometry, Syrian craftsmanship, and Persian engineering traditions. They are not merely low. They are utterly absent, as if your vitality packed a small satchel, slipped out the back door, and relocated to a quiet, agricultural province. Your body now operates entirely on a desperate cocktail of pure instinct, persistent fear, and whatever microscopic nutrients were clinging to the cold potato you quickly inhaled. The clanking, grinding machines operate with flawless, indifferent cruelty. The supervisor shows no concern. Even time itself seems to be deliberately slowing, dragging its feet, relishing the spectacle of your suffering. Your arms burn from repetitive motions that have remained unchanged since the dawn bell. Your back feels locked into a perpetual tragedy pose. Your legs are trembling uncontrollably. Your fingers, strangely, are numb, a condition simultaneously comforting, dulling the pain, and terrifying, making it impossible to judge distance from a fast-moving belt, in a workplace where losing a digit is usually logged as a mild schedule adjustment. This is the period Victorian historians refer to politely as the afternoon slump, and which you experience as the final, irrevocable collapse. Your eyelids turn impossibly heavy. You begin to sway subtly, not in any form of dance, but because gravity seems to be actively negotiating the terms of your surrender. Every minute stretches into an hour. Every hour feels like a meticulously engineered personal assault. Your brain, utterly starved for any stimulation beyond the rhythmic clatter of metal and the foreman's frequent disapproval, starts to profoundly detach. You drift into vivid fantasies, lying peacefully in a sun-drenched meadow, sitting by a serene, silent river, or simply remaining unconscious in any historical period other than this one. Then your hand slips. He is a potent reminder that empires flourish not through isolation, but through the genius they confidently absorb from the surrounding world. Apollodorus also stands as a somber warning about the inherent price of brilliance within autocratic systems. His tragic fate proves that while talent can elevate an empire, it equally threatens those who wield power without humility. Hadrian's insecurity erased the man, but it could not extinguish the truth. Apollodorus built an empire far more lasting than any political reign. For in stone, he achieved true immortality, and in every arch, every vault, every calculated line of his surviving works, Apollodorus of Damascus still speaks more eloquently than any emperor who attempted to silence him. You are instantly jolted awake, the adrenaline a cold shock, and you are reminded with brutal clarity that the apparatus you operate is perfectly capable of removing large sections of your physical form should you indulge in reckless daydreaming. You glance around. Everyone else is suffering the identical collapse. Some workers move strictly on muscle memory, their eyes glazed and distant, like those of exhausted, overworked Victorian owls. Others are visibly pale from acute hunger. A few look so profoundly spent they appear to be quietly attempting communication with the spirit realm. But nobody halts. They cannot. The massive industrial line continues its forward motion, meaning you must also move, because stopping means introducing your living, organic limbs to unforgiving industrial-era engineering. Your mind starts asking absurd, fundamental questions. Asterisk, how long have I been here? What is the actual substance of time? Will this shift ever actually conclude? Asterisk, you check the clock. You are certain 3 hours must have passed. You are devastatingly wrong. It has been 7 minutes. Your stomach gives a desperate, starving growl. Your spine compresses another fraction. Your soul evaporates a little further. But still, the afternoon refuses to concede. All you can do is continue the motion, breathe the toxic, soot-laden air lightly, and pray that the factory bell will eventually show some form of mercy. Spoiler alert, it will not. Not for many, many more hours. A language of liberation, a deliberate unraveling meant to draw worshippers deeper into the presence of Bacchus. The transformation began with masks. Worshippers donned faces of satyrs, thorns, wild beasts, and exaggerated human expressions. Smiling mouths stretched too wide, eyes frozen in ecstatic delight. The mask freed them. Once hidden behind painted terracotta or carved wood, they could shed the identity Rome forced upon them and step into a creature of the wilderness, a being ruled not by logic, but by instinct. Music guided the descent. Flutes pierced the night with restless melodies. Drums throbbed like a second heartbeat, and cymbals clashed in erratic bursts meant to jolt the senses awake. No orderly Roman procession marched to such music. This was sound designed to dissolve the boundary between self and spirit. Participants said, "You didn't hear it, you entered it." The rhythm swallowed thought, replacing it with something primal that demanded movement. And so they moved. Spirals, leaps, trembling motions, collapsing and rising again in waves, each dancer feeding off the frenzy of the next. Wine, of course, flowed without measure. But it was never just a drink. It was a sacrament. Each cup symbolized a step closer to communion with Bacchus, a loosening of the mind so the god could slip into the cracks. The Romans believed inspiration, asterisk fura asterisk, was divine possession. In the Bacchanalia, that possession became the purpose. Worshippers sought the moment when they no longer danced but were danced, when they no longer sang but were sung through. For a few breaths, they ceased to be alone in their bodies. Something shared, something ancient passed through them. Animals were sometimes present, goats crowned with ivy, or small creatures released into the frenzy as living symbols of Bacchus' domain. Torches cast wild shadows onto trees, turning the forest into a stage where reality looked thin and unreliable. And as the rites reached their peak, some participants claimed to feel claws, hooves, or vines brushing against them, hallucinations perhaps, or the mind's attempt to make sense of overwhelming sensory overload. To Rome's conservative eyes, this was chaos. But inside the circle, it felt like truth. The masks allowed honesty without consequence. The music rewrote the boundaries of the self. The wine opened a gate, and when all these elements converged, worshippers believed they touched not insanity but liberation. A freedom Rome could neither grant nor take away, and that freedom terrified the powerful. As the Bacchanalia expanded, so did the rumors surrounding them. The rites were no longer described as simple worship or emotional release. They became, in Rome's imagination, a boiling cauldron of forbidden desires. And to be fair, the line between spiritual ecstasy and physical ecstasy did blur during these ceremonies. This was not accidental. Bacchus was a god of dualities: creation and destruction, joy and madness, chastity and abandon. To worship him was to navigate the liminal space between the sacred and the sensual. Within the circle of worshippers, bodies moved freely, unrestrained by the usual Roman decorum. Participants danced close, hands brushing, breath mingling, limbs weaving into one another as though the entire group shared a single pulse. In that intimate darkness, shaped by wine, music, and the belief in divine presence, ordinary boundaries seemed to dissolve. Rome prized control, restraint, and hierarchy. The Bacchanalia erased them. A slave could place a hand on a nobleman's shoulder without fear. A woman could reject her marital silence and sing, shout, or embrace whomever she wished. For participants, this was not scandal, but liberation. To outsiders, however, it was something far more dangerous. Stories circulated of orgiastic frenzy, of participants losing themselves so completely that they did not remember whom they touched or kissed until dawn. Some accounts claimed men and women lay together in heaps beneath the trees, guided not by desire alone, but by shared possession, driven by the god moving through them. Whether these tales were truth, exaggeration, or political slander is impossible to know. What matters is that the Roman elite believed them. That belief transformed the Bacchanalia from a private cult into a perceived threat. A society built on discipline could not understand a ritual built on surrender. A society obsessed with hierarchy could not tolerate a rite where all were equal in frenzy. And a society terrified of disorder could not abide a festival where worship resembled wild passion under the eyes of a foreign god. Yet for the worshippers themselves, the sensual elements were not sinful or shameful. They were expressions of connection between humans, nature, and the divine. They believed Bacchus dissolved loneliness. They believed he fused his followers into a single ecstatic body. And in a world that rigidly separated individuals by class, gender, and duty, that sense of unity felt like a miracle. This merging, this dangerous intimacy was the spark that would draw the full attention of the Roman Senate.